Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the Caddx Ant Lite, the FPVCycle edition. Looks like it's 14 millimeters wide and 14 millimeters tall. From the back of the PCB to the nose of the lens looks to be just about 14 millimeters as well. From the connector to the lens looks to be a little over 17 millimeters. And as you can see there, we have our camera connector that allows us to change settings on the camera, but the cable and the connector button is not included. It does include the wires to connect, of course, a lens cap, and it comes in this little box. The camera itself on my scale weighs just about 1.7 grams. Comparing that to the Runcam Nano 3 with a wire connector, which weighs 1.3 grams. Ant with a wiring connector weighs just over 2 grams. So we take it outside on my typical setup. So this is recorded on a DVR. The camera is mounted to a board. We're going to do our light test where I take my little black cloth because my little piece of cardboard got thrown away and I touch the lens and then I have it about 1.5 feet away from the lens and we kind of flash the sun into the image, and then I extend my arm out just about as far as I can while still maintaining the board, and we pull the cloth away. We're going to scan the neighborhood a bit. We're going to stand in the shadows, look out into the sun and through the shadows. We're going to look at the garage doors here for a moment, and just to get a fix on any sort of lens distortion, how the straight lines appear, just something I do standard so that you can take a look at a fishbowl or fish eye sort of effect, if it has that or not. As we're scanning the yard, it's worth noting a few specs about this camera. Probably most notable is it is basically an iteration of the original Caddx Ant that doesn't have the mount. So if you're going to mount this, you're going to need to have a canopy that'll mount it for you, or maybe a 3D printed holster or something of that nature. It's 1200 TV lines. It has the global WDR. The input voltage is fairly interesting. It can go from 3.7 volts all the way up to 18 volts, and it has a purported field of view out of 165 degrees. Luckily, this time of year, we still have some greenery to look at. It's going to be getting less and less as we get deeper into or closer into winter. We have a fair bit of leaves that are falling down, and I'll be maintaining that with my son shortly. You can see some of those leaves down on the grass. The backyard's much worse, but of course, that's where a majority of our trees are. I will be doing a short or brief comparison to the Runcam Nano 3. It is not a one-to-one. I don't have it mounted to the board. I don't have that connector for the Runcam Nano 3, and the quad that I pulled it out of still needs that connector. I suppose I could have severed the wires, soldered up a different connector, and then used the standard board. But I think for the purposes of kind of a quick look, you get kind of an idea of a comparison. And that footage will appear after this flight footage, just kind of running it around in the backyard. Of course, this is not my typical camera review setup. That camera doesn't mount in that quad that I have that I typically use. So we do have some VTX interference. We also have some what I think is telemetry noise that is getting into there. Some of those lines and the flashing that you see, that is from the quad itself because it's not being recorded on a on-quad DVR, which is typically what I do for most camera reviews. And I know that some people really like to see the motion, to see how it impacts your sight when flying an FPV, because quite frankly, we don't use these FPV cameras to sit still. We fly them around. I went to the backyard in this particular case. We had some front yard activity recently with some construction and some people moving, things like that going on. So I wanted to steer clear of being out there in the front. I understand if you're looking for more beautiful scenery, but this is what I've got to work with. Being someone who is, has a normal day job. I'm not a YouTuber by a stretch of my income, and also with 3 kids, time is fairly limited. So I decided to go with a backyard flight, which I think is fine. I'm gonna bury it right into the ground after this punch out. Watch this, it's funny. Yeah. So, of course, the quad checked out fine. The camera checked out fine. It is worth noting that the nose of this camera is longer. And if you're using the B-Brain canopy from Newbie Drone, the camera does stick out. I'll show you that back at the desk. But I think next up, we can probably take a look at that comparison footage that I've got from the inside of the house, because this could be a Whoop camera replacement if you're looking for something of that nature, or if you're just looking for something different than the Runcam Nano 3 or some other micro or very light camera. So let's pause it right here. You can see we've got the Nano 3 on the left and we've got the Ant Lite on the right. Now again, this isn't mounted to the same board. I've done what I could from a visual perspective of trying to get them the same, but they are recorded on different DVRs. But this is what I wanted to give you a sight of for field of view and also inside. and we are going to walk it around the house here a little bit so you get a different idea of different lighting and the impact that it has. But this is our field of view, and we're going to have to put up with that core warning, that temperature warning. It's not much of a concern for me. This isn't a quad that if something happens to it that I'm too concerned about, because, you know, I have others. I keep lots of whoops around. I think it is interesting that the Nano 3 is showing kind of a green hue in the lower light. I don't recall seeing that, and I don't recall noticing it when I've been flying this at nighttime, which I tend to fly before I go to bed every day. And that was something when I did this particular view that I noticed that green hue in the lower light. Of course, you can compare the image quality in that light as well. We're going to head out to the garage, and we're going to take a quick look at the night. There's really nothing to see as far as the nighttime view goes because, well, neither camera does very well, but the Ant Lite does better. So depending upon the flying space that you have at night, it may be applicable to use this camera. It may not. It just kind of depends on what you're looking to do with your quad and the lighting in your space. But our neighborhood is very dark, and the Nano 3 is a better representation of how dark it is. So that gives you some idea of how this camera handles light in a darker scenario. I suspect that's probably enough, or at least I'm hopeful it is. Let's go back to the desk. We'll take a look at the settings and wrap up. Here we have the camera settings, and they're the same settings, at least to my eye. I didn't do a side-by-side comparison to the normal Caddx Ant, and we're going to go through those so you can see the different bits. I do think it's worth noting as well that when this launched, I thought it was going to be an FPVCycle exclusive. I do see it listed on Banggood for those of us that might be international. I know that getting parts from US-based shops can be difficult for those that are international pilots out there, builders. So that if you're looking to use this camera, there will be a link down in the video description, not only to the FPVCycle site, Banggood, as well as any other site that I might find that now lists this camera. I did purchase these cameras from FPVCycle, so I don't know what stock is going to be available for those other websites that might be out there. I didn't notice anything in these settings that was unusual. As I said previously, pretty typical settings, and it's the same settings to my eye that we would find on the normal Caddx Ant. It's just doesn't have mounting options as far as using a screw mount. You have to have something else to mount the camera. I mentioned it during the flight footage, and this was the little guy I was flying it on. So we have a typical little 2S quad build up here that's quite efficient, but note that the camera lens does stick out beyond the camera protection of the B-brain mount. And I think you'll find that with most of the pre-made mounts, but of course those of you that are designers for 3D printed objects, you'll be able to make a custom canopy. In this moment, I don't have any company-based canopies that would actually provide camera protection for the lens up beyond the edge. So that's something to keep in mind for your mounting. Of course, it does slide in there quite nicely. Pretty easy, clips in. Don't have to use any other sort of adhesive or anything to mount the camera. I do think if you're going to put it into a whoop, you will need to design something a little bit like the Runcam Nano 3 that has some sort of mount. I don't think this type will work because this one has the Runcam Nano 3 has screw holes so that they could clip it around it and then screw this mount to it. So it would need to be a 3D print of some sort, but for the Ant, it's probably going to need to be a holster or something that goes around the PCB and the lens. Maybe we have those Whoop cameras out there, or the Whoop canopies or camera mounts that kind of click into this space in the lens to hold them steady. I don't tend to prefer those because you can get a little bit of wobble, and then that makes FPV flying a little less enjoyable if you're sensitive to that sort of thing. So I think a holster or something this whole piece kind of grabs onto the camera would probably be a best fit, which of course does increase your weight just a little bit. So the price for this little camera is going to be around $14. I'm sure we'll see price fluctuations as time goes by. This is the Caddx Ant Lite. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, otherwise, please let me know in the section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.